My name is Cassandra Vale, 28, computer science graduate from Redwood University in Millbrook, Colorado. For 6 grueling years, I clawed my way through a demanding engineering program while working nights at a 24-hour diner to pay my own tuition. My family never believed in my dream of becoming a software engineer. Computers are for boys, my mother would say, rolling her eyes whenever I mentioned my latest coding project or algorithm breakthrough. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened at my graduation ceremony last Saturday. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, my heart pounding with pride after years of 18-hour days and endless all-nighters, I heard my mother's voice cutting through the applause like a knife. "What a waste of money," she muttered to my aunt, loud enough for the entire row to hear. 6 years of throwing cash down the drain for a degree that won't get her anywhere. Those words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable crushing the joy I'd felt just moments before. Here I was, the first person in my family to graduate college, and my own mother was calling it worthless. I could have confronted her right there, demanded she take it back, but I didn't. Instead, I stood frozen on that stage, diploma in hand, watching my mother shake her head in disappointment while other families cheered and took photos. What happened next? Let's just say the dean had one more announcement that day, and it wasn't just my mother's jaw that hit the floor. Have you ever had your biggest achievement dismissed by the people who were supposed to support you most? Drop your story in the comments and hit that subscribe button, because what unfolded after that graduation ceremony will show you exactly why persistence pays off and family opinions don't always define your worth. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story ends. Growing up in the small mountain town of Millbrook, Colorado, our family lived in a cramped double-wide trailer on the outskirts of town where the mining equipment rusted in forgotten lots. My mother, Linda Vale, worked double shifts at the local truck stop diner, while my father, Robert Vale, spent most days fixing engines at Murphy's auto shop when he wasn't nursing a beer on our sagging front porch. My younger sister, Bethany Vale, and I shared a room so small we had to take turns getting dressed. Money was always tight, but we made it work. Mom would bring home leftover pie from the diner, and Dad would tell us stories about the cars he'd fixed, making even the most mundane repair sound like an adventure. Those were the good moments, when our little family felt like it could take on the world. But even then, there were rules about what girls could and couldn't do. When I was 12, I found an old computer at a garage sale, a beat-up desktop that barely worked. I begged Dad to let me buy it with my babysitting money, and after much convincing, he agreed. That machine became my obsession. I taught myself to code using library books and whatever internet we could afford, staying up until 3 a.m. learning programming languages with names that sounded like spells: Python, JavaScript, C++. My parents thought it was a phase. "Stop wasting time on that thing," Mom would say, unplugging my computer when dinner was ready. "Learn something useful, like how to balance a checkbook or cook a decent meal." When I told them I wanted to study computer science in college, their reactions were swift and brutal. Dad laughed outright. "College is expensive, Cassie. We can't afford to send you somewhere to play video games for 4 years." Mom was even harsher. "Women don't belong in tech," she declared, her voice final. "You'll just drop out when you realize how hard it is, or worse, graduate and never find a job because no one wants to hire a girl for that kind of work." When I showed them my acceptance letter to Redwood University, complete with a partial scholarship I'd earned through my stellar grades and coding portfolio, they barely glanced at it. "You're setting yourself up for failure," Mom said, tossing the letter back at me. "Mark my words, you'll come crawling back here in 2 years, broke and embarrassed, wishing you'd listened to us." Dad nodded in agreement, already reaching for his beer. "College is just a way for smart kids to go into debt. You'd be better off getting a job at the diner with your mother." But I'd made up my mind. I was going to prove them wrong, even if it meant doing it completely on my own. The day I left for college, Mom didn't even hug me goodbye. She just shook her head and muttered something about stubborn children who don't listen to their parents. Dad handed me $50 and told me to call when I changed my mind about this computer nonsense. Those first weeks at Redwood University were terrifying. While my classmates talked about their parents' support and family expectations, I was figuring out how to survive on ramen noodles and pure determination. I worked at Mel's all-night diner from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., then rushed to morning classes with grease still under my fingernails and exhaustion pulling at my eyelids. My professors noticed my dedication immediately. Dr. Harrison, my algorithms professor, would often stay after class to help me work through complex problems. "You have natural talent," she'd tell me, "but more importantly, you have the work ethic that separates good programmers from great ones." Those words kept me going during the darkest moments, when I questioned whether Mom was right, whether I was just wasting time and money on an impossible dream. The coding came naturally to me, like I'd found the language my brain was meant to speak. While other students struggled with basic concepts, I was already building applications and solving problems that impressed even my upperclassmen peers. My professors began recommending me for advanced courses, research opportunities, and internships that other students could only dream of accessing. But every small victory was shadowed by my family's continued disapproval. When I called home to share news about making Dean's List or landing a prestigious summer internship at a tech startup in Denver, Mom's response was always the same: "That's nice, dear, but when are you coming home to get a real job?" Dad would take the phone and ask if I'd gotten this computer thing out of my system yet. My sister Bethany was the only one who seemed genuinely proud of my achievements, though she was careful not to show it too much around our parents. "I think what you're doing is amazing," she'd whisper during rare moments when we were alone on family visits. "Don't let them convince you otherwise." Her quiet support meant everything, even if she couldn't say it out loud. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As graduation approached, I sent my family an invitation, hoping that seeing me walk across that stage might finally make them understand what I'd accomplished. Mom called it a fancy piece of paper ceremony, but agreed to come, since we've already invested so much time in this foolishness. Dad grumbled about taking time off work but said he supposed he could drive up for the day. I should have known that even my graduation wouldn't be enough to change their minds. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen on what should have been the proudest day of my life. Let me tell you exactly who I am and what was at stake that graduation day. My name is Cassandra Vale, and I'm not your typical computer science graduate. At 28, I'm older than most of my classmates because I took the long road, working full-time while studying part-time for the first 3 years just to afford tuition. I'm the daughter of a truck stop waitress and an auto mechanic from Millbrook, Colorado, a town so small that everyone knows your business before you do. I've been coding since I was 12 years old, teaching myself on a broken computer I bought at a garage sale with babysitting money. While other kids were playing video games, I was building them. While they were on social media, I was creating the algorithms that could power the next generation of apps. I wasn't just studying computer science, I was living it, breathing it, dreaming in code. For 6 years, I juggled a brutal schedule that would have broken most people. Monday through Friday, I attended classes at Redwood University from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., absorbing everything from data structures to machine learning. Then I'd grab a quick dinner and head to Mel's all-night diner, where I worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., serving coffee and burgers to truckers and insomniacs while my textbook sat open behind the counter. I'd study algorithms between orders, debug code during slow nights, and write my senior thesis on artificial intelligence applications while wiping down tables at 3 a.m. My hands constantly smelled like coffee and cleaning solution, but my mind was always racing through loops and functions. I calculated that over those 6 years, I worked over 10,000 hours at that diner, sacrificing sleep, social life, and sometimes sanity to fund my education. The numbers tell the story of my determination. I graduated with a 3.96 GPA, just missing a perfect 4.0 because of 1B+ in my freshman statistics class, a grade I earned while working double shifts to pay for my textbooks. I completed 3 major internships, including one at Technova Solutions in Denver where I built a data analysis platform that increased their processing efficiency by 40%. I published 2 research papers on neural network optimization and presented at 3 national conferences. But here's what made graduation day so crushing: none of that mattered to my family. To them, I was still just Cassie, the stubborn girl who refused to listen to reason and get a real job. They saw 6 years of what they called wasted time and money, not understanding that I'd invested over $80,000 in tuition, books, and living expenses, every penny of it earned through my own sweat and sacrifice. My mother, Linda Vale, has worked at Murphy's truck stop for 23 years, taking orders and pouring coffee for drivers passing through our mountain town. She's tough as nails and proud of her work ethic, but she's never understood why anyone would need more than a high school diploma to make a living. Hard work and common sense, she always said, that's all you need in this world. Everything else is just fancy talk. My father, Robert Vale, is a gifted mechanic who can diagnose engine problems by sound alone, but he views anything involving computers with deep suspicion. He still calls my laptop that typing machine and refers to programming as playing games. To him, real work involves getting your hands dirty and fixing things you can see and touch. Software engineering might as well be magic, and not the good kind. They'd driven 3 hours from Millbrook to Redwood University that Saturday morning, my mother complaining the entire way about missing her weekend shift at the diner. This better be worth the gas money, she'd muttered as they pulled into the campus parking lot, eyeing the Gothic architecture and manicured lawns with obvious discomfort. The graduation ceremony was held in Redwood's historic Oakley Auditorium, a beautiful space with high ceilings and stained glass windows that made everything feel sacred and important. As I put on my cap and gown that morning, my hands were shaking, not from nerves about walking across the stage, but from the weight of 6 years of proving everyone wrong. This wasn't just about getting a diploma. This was about validating every 18-hour day, every missed family gathering because I was studying, every time I fell asleep over my keyboard and woke up with indent marks on my face. This was about proving that a girl from a tiny mountain town could master one of the most challenging fields in modern technology. But more than anything, this was about finally getting my parents to see that I hadn't wasted my life on a foolish dream. I wanted them to watch me walk across that stage and feel proud of their daughter who'd beaten the odds and achieved something extraordinary. I wanted to see recognition in their eyes, maybe even an apology for all the times they'd called my ambitions unrealistic. As we filed into our seats in alphabetical order, I spotted my family in the third row. Mom was checking her phone, probably calculating how much tip money she was losing by being here. Dad was looking around uncomfortably, clearly feeling out of place among all the professors and proud families. Only my sister Bethany seemed genuinely excited, giving me a small wave when she caught my eye. The dean had already mentioned that there would be special announcements during the ceremony, but I assumed they meant typical graduation honors, summa cum laude, departmental awards, that sort of thing. I had no idea that my name would be called for something that would change not just my family's perception of my achievements, but the entire trajectory of my future. What happened next would prove that sometimes the people who doubt you the most are simply preparing you to appreciate victory even sweeter when it finally comes. Have you ever worked years toward a goal while everyone around you said it was impossible? Share your story below, because what you're about to hear might just inspire you to keep pushing toward your own seemingly unreachable dreams. To understand why my mother's words at graduation cut so deep, you need to know how our family used to be. There was a time when Linda and Robert Vale were my biggest cheerleaders, when our cramped trailer felt like the center of the universe, and when my parents believed I could do anything I set my mind to. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at our wobbly kitchen table while Mom helped me with math homework after her shift at the truck stop. Her uniform still smelled like bacon grease and coffee, but she'd sit there patiently for hours, showing me how to carry numbers and work through word problems. "You're so smart, Cassie," she'd say, beaming with pride when I solved a particularly tricky equation. Smartest little girl in all of Millbrook. Dad was the same way back then. He'd come home from Murphy's auto shop with motor oil under his fingernails and let me help him fix things around the trailer. I'd hand him tools and ask endless questions about how engines worked, why certain parts broke, and what made everything run smoothly. Instead of getting annoyed, he'd explain everything in detail, his eyes lighting up when I showed genuine interest. "You've got a natural curiosity," he'd tell me, lifting me up so I could see inside the hood of our old pickup truck. "That's the most important thing anyone can have. Curious people figure out how to fix the world." Those words stayed with me for years, echoing in my head whenever I encountered a challenging coding problem or a complex algorithm. Our family traditions revolved around celebrating achievements, no matter how small. When I brought home a spelling test with a perfect score, Mom would tape it to our refrigerator with ceremony, right next to Bethany's crayon drawings and Dad's work schedule. Every A+ was treated like a major victory, every successful school project worthy of a special dinner where we'd use the good paper plates instead of our usual chipped ceramic ones. Sunday afternoons were our golden time. After church, we'd pile into Dad's truck and drive up to Silver Lake, a pristine mountain lake about 20 minutes from town. Dad would park under the aspens, and we'd spread out our ancient quilted blanket for impromptu picnics. Mom would pack peanut butter sandwiches and thermoses of lemonade, while Dad brought his fishing gear and a worn paperback novel. Those afternoons felt magical. Bethany and I would skip stones across the water while our parents sat close together on the blanket, Dad reading aloud from his book while Mom leaned against his shoulder. Sometimes he'd pause mid-sentence to point out an eagle circling overhead or to help us identify different types of wildflowers growing along the shoreline. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you, Mom would say during those peaceful moments, watching us explore and ask questions about everything we encountered. Your father and I never had the chance to go to college, but we're going to make sure you girls have every opportunity we didn't. Those words felt like promises, like commitments carved in stone. The change started gradually when I turned 12 and discovered that garage sale computer. At first, my parents were amused by my fascination with the old machine. They'd peek over my shoulder as I worked through basic programming tutorials, marveling at the lines of code scrolling across the screen. "Look at our little genius," Dad would joke, ruffling my hair as I debugged my first simple programs. But their amusement slowly turned to concern as my interest deepened. When I spent my 13th birthday money on programming books instead of clothes or music, Mom frowned. "This computer thing is taking over your life, Cassie. You need balance." When I asked for a better computer for Christmas, Dad shook his head. "That old thing works fine. You don't need anything fancy for a hobby." The word hobby stung because I'd already realized that programming wasn't just something I enjoyed, it was something I was genuinely gifted at. While my classmates struggled to understand basic HTML in our school's primitive computer lab, I was already building simple websites and games. My high school computer science teacher, Mr. Peterson, pulled me aside after class one day to tell me I had exceptional aptitude and should seriously consider pursuing technology as a career. When I brought this news home, excited to share Mr. Peterson's encouragement, my parents' reaction was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, not looking up from the bills she was sorting at the kitchen table. "But remember, teachers sometimes get carried away with their enthusiasm. They don't understand what the real world is like." Dad was more direct. "Peterson's a good man, but he's been stuck in that classroom for 20 years. He doesn't know anything about making a living in the real world. Computers are fine for smart people to play with, but they're not a career path for someone like you. Someone like me." Those words marked the beginning of a shift in how my parents saw my future. Instead of the limitless potential they'd once celebrated, they started talking about realistic expectations and practical choices. When I mentioned wanting to study computer science in college, they exchanged the kind of look that parents share when their child announces they want to become an astronaut or a movie star. "College is expensive," Mom said carefully, her tone suggesting this conversation was already over. "And computer jobs, well, those are for different kinds of people. People who come from families that understand that world." She gestured around our small trailer, taking in our second-hand furniture and thrift store decorations. "We're working people, Cassie. Always have been, always will be." The foundation of our relationship, built on their belief in my potential, began cracking under the weight of their limited vision of what was possible for someone from our background. The parents who'd once told me I could do anything started setting boundaries on my dreams, drawing lines around what they considered appropriate ambitions for a girl from Millbrook. Our Sunday picnics became less frequent as I spent more time learning advanced programming languages and building increasingly complex projects. When we did go to Silver Lake, I'd bring my laptop to work on code while enjoying the mountain air. But instead of asking interested questions about what I was building, my parents would suggest I put that thing away and enjoy nature. The distance grew wider when I started talking seriously about college applications and career plans. Every conversation about my future became a gentle but persistent campaign to redirect my interests toward what they considered more suitable paths. "Have you thought about teaching?" Mom would ask. "You're so good at explaining things to Bethany. Teachers get summers off and good benefits." Dad would nod in agreement. "Or maybe nursing. That's steady work, and people always need medical care. Much more reliable than this computer business." They weren't trying to be cruel or limiting, they genuinely believed they were protecting me from disappointment and failure. But their protection felt like a cage, and their love came with conditions I was no longer willing to accept. The parents who'd once celebrated my curiosity now saw it as impractical idealism. The family that had supported my academic achievements now questioned whether those achievements had any real-world value. Looking back, I can see that my parents' dreams for me were shaped by their own experiences and limitations. They'd worked hard their entire lives without ever seeing their efforts translated into upward mobility or expanded opportunities. From their perspective, encouraging me to pursue an ambitious, uncertain path was setting me up for the kind of crushing disappointment they'd spent their lives avoiding. But understanding their motivations didn't make their doubt any less painful to live with. Every discouraging comment, every suggestion that I should be more realistic, felt like a betrayal of the little girl they'd once told could achieve anything. By the time I left for college, the foundation of unconditional support had been replaced by resigned tolerance and barely concealed worry that I was making a terrible mistake. The decision to pursue computer science despite my parents' disapproval came with a price tag I hadn't fully calculated. When I enrolled at Redwood University, I knew I'd be funding my education entirely alone, but I had no idea how that reality would reshape every aspect of my life for the next 6 years. My freshman year hit like a sledgehammer. While my classmates worried about which dining plan to choose or whether their dorm rooms had enough storage space, I was calculating whether I could afford both textbooks and groceries in the same week. That first computer science textbook cost $340, more than I'd ever spent on anything except my laptop. I stood in the campus bookstore for 20 minutes, holding that thick volume and doing math in my head, trying to figure out if I could survive on rice and peanut butter for 2 weeks to make the purchase work. I called home that first week, hoping my parents might offer some financial help once they saw how serious I was about my studies. "The books are more expensive than I expected," I told Mom, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "And the lab fees are pretty steep too." Her response was swift and final. "We told you college was expensive, Cassie. You made this choice knowing we couldn't help. You're going to have to figure it out on your own." Dad took the phone and added, "Maybe this will teach you to be more practical about your goals." That conversation taught me my first lesson in complete financial independence. Within a week, I'd applied for every campus job available, finally landing a position at Mel's all-night diner just off campus. The night shift paid $12 an hour plus tips, and the manager, Joe Ramirez, was willing to work around my class schedule. Those early months nearly broke me. I'd attend lectures from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., then grab a quick nap in my dorm before heading to the diner for the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. I'd serve coffee and burgers to drunk college students, exhausted hospital workers, and long-haul truckers, all while fighting to stay awake and alert. My textbooks lived behind the counter, and I'd study during slow periods, highlighting key concepts between orders for hash browns and coffee refills. The physical exhaustion was brutal, but the emotional toll was worse. I'd watch my classmates head home for weekend visits, their cars loaded with care packages and laundry their parents would wash for free. Meanwhile, I was calculating whether I could afford the quarters for the dorm laundromat or if I should hand wash my clothes in the sink again. My sophomore year, I made a decision that would define the rest of my college experience. I moved off campus to save money on housing costs. I found a studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery for $400 a month, half what the dorms cost, but it came with its own challenges. The place was tiny, barely 300 square feet, with a Murphy bed that doubled as my desk when folded up. The heating was unreliable, and I spent that first winter coding while wearing fingerless gloves and 3 sweaters. But that little apartment became my sanctuary. I set up my computer station by the window, surrounded by towers of programming books I'd bought used or borrowed from the library for weeks at a time. The walls were covered with printouts of code, flowcharts, and algorithms I was trying to master. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, a space where I could pursue my dreams without anyone questioning their validity. The financial pressure never let up. Beyond tuition, which consumed most of my diner earnings, there were constant smaller expenses that added up relentlessly. Software licenses for development tools, lab fees for advanced courses, conference registration when I wanted to present my research, professional clothes for internship interviews. Every step forward required another financial sacrifice. I became a master of creative budgeting. I'd buy vegetables that were on sale and make massive batches of soup that would last for weeks. I learned to cut my own hair using YouTube tutorials. I mended clothes instead of replacing them, walked everywhere to save on gas, and became friends with the librarians who'd let me stay past closing time so I could use the campus computers when mine inevitably broke down. The social costs were perhaps the hardest to bear. While my classmates joined study groups that met at coffee shops, I was working. When they attended department mixers and networking events, I was serving late-night meals to people who'd had too much to drink. I missed parties, campus activities, and even some class discussions because I was simply too exhausted to participate fully. Dating was practically impossible. How do you explain to someone that you can't go out for dinner because you're spending every free dollar on compiler software? I watched my classmates form relationships and friend groups while I remained on the periphery, always rushing between work and studies, never having the time or energy for the social aspects of college life. But the academic sacrifices were the most painful. I had to turn down unpaid research opportunities because I couldn't afford to work fewer hours at the diner. I missed conferences where I could have presented my work because I couldn't cover the travel expenses. When my algorithms professor, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, invited me to join an elite summer research program, I had to decline because it would have meant 3 months without income. "You're one of the most talented students I've seen," Dr. Martinez told me after I explained why I couldn't participate. "But talent without opportunity is just potential energy. You need to find ways to invest in your future, not just survive your present." Her words haunted me because I knew she was right, but I also knew she didn't understand my reality. Investment requires disposable income, and I was living paycheck to paycheck, tip to tip, surviving on the thinnest possible margins. By my junior year, the cumulative effect of sleep deprivation and constant financial stress was showing. I'd lost 20 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, and I'd developed a persistent cough from working in the diner's kitchen where the ventilation was poor. My grades remained high. I was too stubborn to let exhaustion affect my academic performance, but I was running on willpower and caffeine, pushing my body and mind beyond their sustainable limits. The breaking point came during finals week of my junior year. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, studying for my data structures exam while working a double shift because one of my coworkers had called in sick. I was reviewing binary tree algorithms when I suddenly found myself on the floor of the diner's kitchen, having fainted from exhaustion and malnutrition. Joe Ramirez drove me to the campus health center, where a doctor told me I was severely anemic and dehydrated. "You can't keep this up," she warned. "Your body is telling you that something has to give." As I lay on that examination table, I realized I'd been so focused on proving I could succeed on my own that I'd nearly destroyed myself in the process. That night, I called home for the first time in months. When Mom answered, I almost broke down completely. "I'm struggling," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "College is harder than I thought it would be." For a moment, I heard something like concern in her voice. "Are you eating enough? Getting enough sleep?" But before I could answer, she continued, "Maybe it's time to come home, Cassie. You've proven you can handle college work. Now come back and put those skills to use in the real world." Even in my moment of weakness, I knew that coming home meant giving up on my dreams and accepting their vision of my limitations. I hung up the phone more determined than ever to see this through, but also more aware than I'd ever been of exactly what this journey was costing me. By my senior year, subtle signs began emerging that my family's disappointment in my choices was hardening into something deeper and more hurtful. What started as gentle discouragement had evolved into active dismissal of everything I'd accomplished, and I was too exhausted from juggling work and studies to recognize how toxic the dynamic had become. The first red flag appeared during my winter break visit home. I'd just completed an internship at Dataflow Innovations in Denver, where I'd built a machine learning model that reduced their data processing time by 60%. I was bursting with excitement to share this achievement, thinking surely this real-world success would finally demonstrate the value of my education. I found my parents in the living room, Dad watching a football game while Mom folded laundry. "Guess what?" I said, settling onto our worn couch. My internship supervisor said the algorithm I developed might be implemented company-wide. They're even considering offering me a full-time position after graduation. Dad muted the television and turned to look at me with what I initially mistook for interest. "That's nice, Cassie," he said, his tone flat. "But what does it actually pay? Because all this school has cost you 6 years and a mountain of debt, and I'm not seeing the return on investment." Mom looked up from folding Dad's work shirts. "Your cousin Kelly just got promoted to manager at the bank. She's making $45,000 a year with full benefits, and she never set foot in a college classroom. Sometimes I wonder if she's the smart one." The comparison stung, but what hurt more was their inability to see past salary numbers to the significance of what I'd accomplished. I tried explaining that my internship supervisor had called my work graduate-level research, and that similar positions in the field typically started at much higher salaries than Kelly's bank job. But their eyes glazed over when I mentioned machine learning algorithms and data optimization. "It all sounds very fancy," Mom said, returning to her laundry, "but at the end of the day, you're still living in that tiny apartment above a bakery, working at a diner to make ends meet. Kelly has her own house and a reliable income. Which one of you is really succeeding?" The second warning sign came during spring break, when I brought home my senior portfolio, a collection of projects and research papers I'd been developing throughout my degree program. One project was particularly complex, a neural network application that could predict equipment failure in manufacturing systems. I'd spent months perfecting it, and my professors had called it publication quality work. I spread the printed documentation across our kitchen table, walking my parents through the technical specifications and potential real-world applications. "This could save companies millions of dollars in equipment downtime," I explained, pointing to the performance metrics and accuracy rates. Dad picked up one of the pages, squinting at the code listings and mathematical formulas. After a few seconds, he set it down and shook his head. "Cassie, I can't understand a word of this. And if I can't understand it, how is it going to help anybody?" "That's exactly the point," I said, my excitement undimmed. "This is specialized knowledge. Companies pay well for expertise they can't find elsewhere." Mom joined us at the table, flipping through the pages with obvious bewilderment. "All these numbers and symbols, it looks like gibberish to me. Are you sure this is real work, or just busy work they give students to keep them occupied?" Her question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what I'd been doing for 4 years. She literally couldn't distinguish between meaningful technical work and random academic exercises. When I tried to explain the difference, she interrupted, "I just think you're overthinking everything. Most jobs are simpler than you're making this out to be." The third red flag was more subtle but perhaps more damaging. Throughout my senior year, my parents stopped asking about my grades, my projects, or my future plans. Our phone conversations became perfunctory check-ins about my health and whether I was eating enough. They'd update me on local gossip and family news, but whenever I tried to share academic achievements or job prospects, they'd change the subject. When I called to tell them I'd been selected to present my research at the Regional Computer Science Conference, Mom's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you that Mrs. Patterson's daughter just had her second baby? They bought a house with a big backyard." The implication was clear: my academic success was less significant than traditional milestones like marriage, children, and homeownership. Every achievement I shared was met with stories about former classmates who'd taken conventional paths and were now living what my parents considered normal adult lives. The pattern became so predictable that I started dreading our conversations. I'd call home excited about some breakthrough or opportunity, only to have my enthusiasm met with polite disinterest followed by redirections toward topics my parents found more meaningful. They weren't being deliberately cruel, but their consistent dismissal of my accomplishments felt like death by 1,000 paper cuts. The fourth warning sign emerged when I started receiving recognition from the university itself. When I was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, the Academic Honor Society, I sent my parents the notification letter, thinking they'd finally understand that my achievements were being recognized at the highest levels. Dad called a few days later. "We got your letter about that Greek club thing," he said. "Is that something you have to pay dues for? Because it seems like another way for the university to get money out of students." I explained that Phi Beta Kappa was the most prestigious academic honor society in the country, that membership was invitation only based on exceptional grades and intellectual achievement. "Only the top 10% of students are invited," I told him. "It's recognition for academic excellence." "Well," Dad said after a pause, "I suppose that's something. But don't let it go to your head. At the end of the day, employers care more about what you can do than what clubs you belong to in college." His response epitomized their entire attitude. Even my most significant achievements were diminished, qualified, or reframed as potential character flaws rather than sources of legitimate pride. The fifth and most hurtful red flag appeared when I started job searching in earnest. Major tech companies were recruiting on campus, and I'd landed interviews with several prestigious firms. When I mentioned these opportunities to my parents, their reaction wasn't excitement about potential career prospects, it was anxiety about me moving even further from home. "Amazon wants to interview me for a software engineering position in Seattle," I told them during one call. "The starting salary would be more than you and Mom make combined." Instead of congratulating me, Mom's first response was, "Seattle's so far away. And it's expensive to live there. You'd probably end up spending everything you make just on rent." Dad agreed. "These big companies like to dazzle young people with impressive numbers, but they work you to death. You'd be better off finding something local, something stable." When I pointed out that there were no local tech companies in Millbrook, and that pursuing my career would necessarily require relocating, they became even more resistant. "Why can't you just use your computer skills to help local businesses?" Mom asked. "Mr. Murphy could probably use help with his accounting software." Their suggestion that I should use my advanced degree to do basic bookkeeping for my father's boss revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood both my education and my potential. They'd reduced 4 years of intensive study in cutting-edge technology to simple computer literacy, as if my machine learning expertise was equivalent to knowing how to use QuickBooks. By the time graduation approached, I realized my parents weren't just disappointed in my choices, they were actively hostile to my success. Every achievement threatened their worldview, every opportunity challenged their assumptions about what was possible for someone from our background. They'd convinced themselves that my education was an elaborate form of self-deception, and my success would prove their limitations rather than my potential. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been building for 6 years, where their need to be right about my limitations would collide head-on with evidence of my achievements. I just didn't realize how public and humiliating that collision would be. The morning of graduation day arrived with deceptive calm. I woke up in my tiny studio apartment at 6 a.m., sunlight streaming through the window I'd positioned my desk beside for the past 3 years. Today was supposed to be the culmination of everything I'd worked for, the moment when 6 years of sacrifice and determination would finally be recognized and celebrated. I'd laid out my cap and gown the night before, pressing them carefully to remove any wrinkles. The black fabric represented more than just academic achievement, it was armor, proof that I'd survived and thrived despite every obstacle my family had placed in my path. As I got dressed, I practiced my walk across the stage, imagining the moment when Dean Patricia Hoffman would hand me my diploma and I'd finally be able to call myself a computer science graduate. My parents had driven up from Millbrook the previous evening, staying at the Budget Inn on the edge of campus. I'd offered to let them use my apartment, but Mom had taken one look at the Murphy bed and cramped quarters and declared it too small for 3 people. Their choice to stay at a motel felt symbolic. Even on my graduation day, they were maintaining distance from the life I'd built. We'd agreed to meet for breakfast at Sunrise Cafe, a small diner near campus that reminded me of the truck stop where Mom worked. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. When they walked in, I was struck by how out of place they looked among the other families celebrating their graduates. Dad wore his good khakis and a button-down shirt that was slightly too tight, while Mom had chosen a floral dress I recognized from church services back home. "Well, look at you," Mom said, settling into the booth across from me. "All dressed up for your big day." Her tone was pleasant enough, but there was something detached about it, as if she were commenting on a stranger's appearance rather than her daughter's achievement. Dad ordered coffee and eggs while scanning the restaurant's other patrons, professors, students, and proud families all buzzing with excitement about the day's ceremonies. "Lot of fancy folks here," he observed. "This whole town feels like it's putting on airs." I tried to steer the conversation toward positive topics, sharing details about the ceremony schedule and mentioning that Dean Hoffman had hinted at special announcements during the program. "The department chair said there might be some surprise honors," I said, hoping to build their anticipation. Mom stirred her coffee absently. "Honors are nice, I suppose. But what matters is what comes next. Have you figured out what you're going to do with this degree yet?" The question felt like a trap. I'd been accepted to 3 graduate programs and had job offers pending from 2 major tech companies, but I knew my parents viewed both paths with suspicion. Graduate school meant more years of what they considered impractical study, while corporate jobs meant moving far from home to cities they considered foreign and hostile. "I'm considering several options," I said carefully. "There are some interesting opportunities that would really let me use what I've learned." Dad set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Opportunities," he repeated. "That's what you've been chasing for 6 years now, opportunities. Maybe it's time to focus on certainties. Real jobs with steady paychecks." Before I could respond, Bethany arrived with her boyfriend Marcus, both of them wearing proud smiles and carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "There's our graduate," Bethany exclaimed, sliding into the booth beside me and giving me a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you, Cassie. What you've accomplished is incredible." Her genuine enthusiasm was such a contrast to our parents' subdued reaction that I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thank you for coming," I whispered. "It means everything to have you here." Marcus shook my hand formally. "Bethany's told me so much about your work. The artificial intelligence research you've been doing sounds fascinating. I'd love to hear more about it sometime." I saw Mom and Dad exchange a look, the same expression they'd worn when I tried to explain my senior projects. To them, Marcus's interest was just politeness, not genuine appreciation for technical achievement. We finished breakfast with stilted conversation about the weather and the campus architecture. As we prepared to leave for the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "Cassie, I want you to know we're proud of you for finishing what you started. That takes determination. But don't let today go to your head. You're still the same girl from Millbrook, and you need to remember where you come from." His words were meant as wisdom, but they felt like a preemptive strike against any confidence or joy I might feel during the ceremony. Even on graduation day, he was reminding me to keep my expectations low, to remember my place rather than celebrate my achievements. The ceremony was held in Oakley Auditorium, Redwood University's most prestigious venue. As families filed in and graduates assembled backstage, the energy was electric. My classmates were hugging, taking photos, and sharing memories of our journey together. Despite the social isolation I'd experienced due to work obligations, being surrounded by fellow computer science majors felt like coming home to a tribe that understood the significance of what we'd accomplished. Dr. Martinez found me in the staging area and squeezed my shoulder. "Ready for this, Cassandra? You've earned every bit of recognition coming your way." Her words confused me slightly. Graduation seemed like recognition enough, but I was too nervous to ask what she meant. When it came time to file into the auditorium, I spotted my family in the 3rd row. Bethany waved enthusiastically while Marcus took photos. Mom and Dad sat rigidly, looking uncomfortable among the other celebrating families. I could see Mom checking her watch, probably calculating how long until they could begin the drive back to Millbrook. Dean Hoffman began the ceremony with remarks about our class's achievements and the bright futures awaiting us. She mentioned that several graduates had received special recognition that would be announced during the diploma presentation. My heart began racing, not because I expected anything, but because the formal atmosphere was finally making the magnitude of this moment sink in. As we moved through the alphabet, I watched my classmates cross the stage to enthusiastic applause from their families. When Thomas Vale was called, the student listed just before me, I stood and smoothed my gown, preparing for my moment. But before I could take my first step toward the stage, I heard my mother's voice cutting through the polite applause like a blade. She wasn't trying to whisper, her words were clearly audible to everyone in our section of the auditorium. "What a waste of money," she said to my Aunt Linda, who had driven up with them for the ceremony. 6 years of throwing cash down the drain for a degree that won't get her anywhere. All this fancy education nonsense when she could have been working and building a real life. The words hit me like a physical blow. I froze at the edge of the staging area, my carefully rehearsed walk forgotten as my mother's dismissal echoed in my ears. Around me, other families were cheering and taking photos while my own mother was publicly declaring my life's work worthless. Aunt Linda tried to shush her, but Mom continued, "Mark my words, she'll be back home within a year," wondering why she wasted all this time on computer games when she could have learned a useful trade. The graduate behind me had to gently touch my shoulder to remind me to move forward. I walked across that stage in a daze, my legs carrying me automatically while my mind reeled from the humiliation of having my achievements dismissed so publicly and completely. Dean Hoffman smiled warmly as she shook my hand, but I could barely focus on her words. All I could hear was the echo of my mother's voice, calling 6 years of sacrifice and determination a waste of money for an auditorium full of people to hear. What I didn't know was that Dean Hoffman was about to make an announcement that would transform my mother's public humiliation into something else entirely, a moment that would prove just how catastrophically wrong her assessment of my future had been. Standing on that stage with my diploma in trembling hands, I made a decision that would change everything. As Dean Hoffman continued speaking to the crowd, I realized I was done letting my family's limitations define my worth. Their public humiliation had been the final straw, but what happened next would prove that sometimes the universe has a way of delivering justice when you least expect it. Dean Hoffman stepped back to the podium, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. "Before we conclude today's ceremony, I have several special announcements to make regarding exceptional achievements by members of our graduating class." My heart was still pounding from my mother's cutting words, but something in the dean's tone made me pay attention. I remained standing at the side of the stage with my diploma, waiting for the ceremony to conclude so I could escape this humiliation and process what had just happened. "Our first recognition goes to a student whose research has caught the attention of the national academic community," Dean Hoffman continued. "Cassandra Vale has been awarded the prestigious Turing Fellowship for Advanced Computing Research, a full-ride doctoral program at Stanford University with an annual stipend of $45,000. The words hit me like lightning. I stood frozen, unable to process what I just heard. The Turing Fellowship was one of the most competitive awards in computer science. Only 12 students nationwide received it each year. I'd applied months ago but never heard back, assuming I'd been rejected." Dean Hoffman wasn't finished. Additionally, Ms. Vale's undergraduate research on neural network optimization has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Advanced Computing Systems, making her one of only 3 undergraduates nationwide to achieve publication in this prestigious journal this year. The auditorium erupted in applause, but I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not after my mother had just publicly declared my education worthless. I looked out at the audience and saw my family's section, where Mom's face had gone completely white and Dad's mouth was hanging open. But Dean Hoffman still wasn't done. "Finally, we're proud to announce that Google has selected Ms. Vale for their Elite AI Research Track program, offering her a position on their machine learning development team with a starting salary of $165,000 annually, plus stock options and relocation assistance." The applause grew louder, and I realized that students and faculty members were standing up in recognition. Dr. Martinez was beaming from the faculty section, and my classmates were cheering from their seats. But all I could focus on was my family's horrified expressions as they realized that everything they dismissed as worthless had just been validated in the most public way possible. Dean Hoffman gestured for me to return to the podium. On shaking legs, I walked back across the stage, still clutching my diploma like a life preserver. The dean shook my hand again, this time holding it firmly as she spoke directly to me. Cassandra, your professors describe your work as graduate-level research that's pushing the boundaries of artificial intelligence applications. Your dedication to excellence while working full-time to support yourself has been an inspiration to faculty and students alike. Would you like to say a few words to your fellow graduates? I stepped to the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces turned toward me expectantly. My family sat in stunned silence while other families applauded enthusiastically. For 6 years, I'd dreamed of this moment, not the recognition, which I'd never dared imagine, but simply the validation that my choices had been worthwhile. Thank you, Dean Hoffman, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 6 years ago, when I started this journey, people told me I was being unrealistic. They said computer science was too difficult, too competitive, and that someone like me didn't belong in this field. I paused, looking directly at my parents. Today I want to thank everyone who believed in me, especially the professors who saw potential when others saw limitations. And I want to tell anyone who's been discouraged from pursuing their dreams that persistence and hard work can overcome any obstacle, including the doubts of people who love you but don't understand your vision. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped back from the microphone, Dr. Martinez approached me with tears in her eyes. Cassandra, we've been trying to reach you for weeks about these awards. Your phone number in our system was disconnected. I realized I'd been so busy working and studying that I'd forgotten to update my contact information when I'd switched to a cheaper phone plan. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd missed learning about these life-changing opportunities because I'd been too focused on surviving financially to maintain basic communication systems. As the ceremony concluded and families began filing out, I stood in the backstage area, still processing what had just happened. The Turing Fellowship alone was worth over $300,000 in tuition and living expenses. The Google position represented more money than my parents had made in their entire careers combined. And the journal publication meant my research would influence the field I'd worked so hard to enter. Bethany was the first family member to reach me, throwing her arms around me in a fierce hug. I can't believe it, she whispered. Stanford. Google. Cassie, do you realize what this means? Marcus was right behind her, pumping my hand enthusiastically. That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. 3 major announcements for one student, that has to be some kind of record. But when I looked past them, I saw my parents standing awkwardly by the auditorium wall, clearly unsure how to approach me. Other families were taking photos and celebrating loudly, but Mom and Dad looked like they'd been struck by lightning. The woman who'd called my education a waste of money just minutes earlier was now faced with evidence that contradicted everything she believed about my choices. I walked over to them, still holding my diploma and the ceremonial certificate Dean Hoffman had given me for the Turing Fellowship. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence stretched uncomfortably as other families celebrated around us. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Cassie, we had no idea. Nobody told us about any of this. Because you never asked, I replied quietly. For 6 years, you've dismissed everything I've achieved without ever trying to understand what I was actually doing. You decided my education was worthless before you knew anything about my accomplishments. Mom's face was flushed with embarrassment. We didn't know Stanford was interested in you. Or that Google. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. What you said up there, I continued, about my education being a waste of money? Everyone heard you. My professors, my classmates, their families. You humiliated me at what should have been the proudest moment of my life. The hurt in my voice was unmistakable, and I saw Mom flinch. But I wasn't finished. 6 years of accumulated frustration and disappointment were finally finding their voice. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove I was worthy of your support, or at least your respect. I nearly destroyed my health trying to succeed without any help from the people who should have believed in me most. And today, when I finally achieved something extraordinary, your first instinct was to diminish it. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We just didn't understand. No, I interrupted. You didn't want to understand. Understanding would have required admitting that your daughter might be capable of more than you imagined. It would have meant accepting that your limitations don't have to be mine. The conversation was drawing attention from other families, but I no longer cared about public scenes. My mother had started this confrontation in public. I was going to finish it the same way. I'm moving to California next month to start the doctoral program at Stanford, I announced. After that, I'll probably stay on the West Coast for my career. I want you to know that I'll always love you, but I'm done trying to earn approval that will never come. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving my parents standing in stunned silence while I joined my professors and classmates who were genuinely excited to celebrate my achievements. For the first time in 6 years, I was choosing to surround myself with people who saw my potential rather than my limitations. The aftermath of graduation day unleashed a storm I wasn't prepared for. Within hours of the ceremony, my phone was buzzing with calls from family members who'd heard about the announcements through Millbrook's efficient gossip network. But instead of congratulations, I found myself facing a coordinated campaign to downplay my achievements and guilt me into staying close to home. The first call came from my Aunt Linda while I was still at the post-graduation reception with my professors. "Cassie, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "your mother is beside herself. She's been crying since you left the auditorium. Don't you think you were a little harsh? She and your father drove all that way to support you." I stepped outside the faculty lounge to take the call privately. "Aunt Linda, did you hear what she said during the ceremony? She called my education a waste of money in front of hundreds of people. She was just nervous, sweetheart. You know how your mother gets in unfamiliar situations. She didn't mean anything by it." Linda's tone suggested I was overreacting to a minor misunderstanding rather than responding to 6 years of accumulated dismissal. Before I could respond, she continued, "Besides, all this Stanford business sounds very impressive, but California is so far from family. And you know how expensive it is out there. Are you sure you're making the right decision?" Even faced with a full-ride fellowship and a 6-figure job offer, my family was still questioning my judgment. I realized this conversation was just the beginning of what would become a sustained effort to undermine my confidence and keep me from pursuing opportunities they couldn't understand or control. The second wave of pressure came through my father, who called that evening while I was packing my apartment. His approach was more direct than Linda's manipulation, but equally frustrating. "Cassie, we need to talk about this Stanford situation," he said without preamble. "I've been doing some research, and this doctoral program sounds like more of the same, years more school instead of getting a real job and starting your life." I sat down heavily on my Murphy bed, exhausted from the day's emotional roller coaster. "Dad, it's a fully funded program with a substantial stipend. I'll be conducting cutting-edge research while earning my doctorate. This is exactly what I've been working toward." "But when does it end?" he pressed. "You've already spent 6 years in college. Now you want to spend another 5 or 6 years playing student instead of contributing to society. At what point do you start acting like an adult?" His words stung because they revealed how fundamentally he misunderstood academic research. To him, anything that happened on a university campus was playing student rather than real work, regardless of the complexity or importance of the research being conducted. "Dad, this research has real-world applications. The work I'll be doing could revolutionize how we approach artificial intelligence and machine learning. Companies like Google and Microsoft are desperately looking for people with this expertise." "Companies like Google," he repeated mockingly. "Cassie, these tech companies are just bubbles waiting to burst. They hire people for inflated salaries, then lay them off when the market changes. You'd be better off with a stable job at a bank or a government agency, something with real security." I realized we were speaking different languages. Dad's concept of job security was based on his experience in a small town where the same families had worked the same jobs for generations. He couldn't comprehend an economy where expertise and innovation commanded premium salaries, or where changing jobs frequently was a sign of success rather than instability. The third assault on my decisions came from my mother herself, who showed up at my apartment unannounced the next morning while I was sorting through my belongings. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway with red-rimmed eyes and a container of homemade cookies, her traditional peace offering after family conflicts. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my tiny studio. She looked around the space I'd called home for 3 years with obvious distaste, taking in the Murphy bed, the makeshift desk, and the stacks of technical books that lined every available surface. "This is what I'm talking about," she said, gesturing broadly. "Look at how you've been living, Cassie. This isn't normal for a 28-year-old woman. You should have a real home, a relationship, maybe children by now. Instead, you're planning to move even further away to spend more years living like a poor student." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Mom, I chose this lifestyle temporarily to achieve my goals. The Stanford Fellowship includes housing and a living stipend. I won't be living in poverty, I'll be investing in my future." She sat down heavily on my desk chair, which creaked under her weight. Your future, that's all you ever talk about. But what about right now? What about family? What about the people who love you and want you close by?" For a moment, her voice cracked with genuine emotion, and I felt a familiar tug of guilt. This was her most effective weapon, making me feel selfish for pursuing opportunities that would take me away from home. "I love you too, Mom," I said carefully, "but love doesn't mean sacrificing my potential to make you comfortable with my choices. You've never supported my education or my goals. Why should I give up everything I've worked for to stay close to people who don't believe in me?" Her expression hardened. "Don't believe in you? We've supported you for 28 years. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, and gave you a good foundation. Now you're throwing all that away to chase some fantasy about becoming a big shot in California." "You didn't support my education," I replied firmly. "I paid for every penny of college myself while working night shifts at a diner. You told me I was wasting my time and money. Even yesterday, at my graduation, you called it all worthless." "I never said worthless," she protested, though we both knew she was splitting hairs. "You said it was a waste of money. In front of hundreds of people. At the moment I was receiving my diploma." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "And now, when it turns out I was right about my potential, you want me to give up the biggest opportunity of my life to stay here and prove that family comes first." Mom stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "You're being selfish and ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By moving across the country and abandoning your family?" The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Mom cycling through guilt, anger, and emotional manipulation. She brought up every sacrifice she'd ever made as a parent, every financial struggle our family had faced, and every reason why I owed it to them to stay close to home and pursue a normal life. When she finally left, I was emotionally drained but more resolved than ever. Her visit had clarified something important. My family's definition of love required me to diminish myself to make them comfortable. They could only support me if my success didn't challenge their worldview or require them to acknowledge their own limitations. The final confrontation came 3 days later during what my parents called a family meeting at their house in Millbrook. I'd driven down thinking we might finally have a productive conversation about my future, but I walked into an intervention-style ambush. My parents had recruited Uncle Jim, my mother's brother who worked in banking, and family friend Pastor Williams to help them convince me to reconsider this California nonsense. They'd arranged chairs in a circle in our living room, and everyone had prepared talking points about why staying local was the wiser, more Christian, more family-oriented choice. "Cassandra," Pastor Williams began in his most authoritative voice, "pride goeth before a fall. These fancy schools and big companies, they're not God's plan for young women. Your calling is to serve your family and community, not to chase worldly success in a place like California." Uncle Jim jumped in with financial arguments. "Even with this fellowship, you'll be taking on opportunity costs. You could be earning money and building equity right now instead of extending your education indefinitely." The entire conversation felt surreal. Here were 4 adults who'd never achieved anything remotely comparable to my accomplishments, trying to convince me that accepting opportunities at Stanford and Google was somehow a mistake. They spoke with absolute certainty about fields they knew nothing about, making pronouncements about my future based on their own fears and limitations. I let them talk for 20 minutes before standing up to leave. "I'm moving to California next month," I announced calmly. I'm grateful for your concern, but this conversation is over. As I walked toward the door, my father's voice stopped me cold. If you leave for California, don't expect us to be here when you come crawling back. I turned to face him, seeing the man who'd once encouraged my curiosity now threatening to disown me for pursuing excellence. Then I guess I won't be coming back, I replied, and walked out of the house where I'd grown up, knowing I was walking away from more than just a building. 2 years have passed since I walked out of my childhood home, and the transformation in my life has been nothing short of extraordinary. As I write this from my office at Stanford University, where I'm completing my doctoral research in artificial intelligence ethics, I can hardly recognize the exhausted girl who once served coffee at 3 a.m. while studying algorithms between orders. The move to California marked the beginning of a completely different existence. Stanford provided not just academic resources, but an entire ecosystem of brilliant minds working on problems that could reshape the future. My research on bias detection in machine learning algorithms caught the attention of tech industry leaders, and I've presented my findings at conferences in London, Tokyo, and Berlin. The scared girl from Millbrook who once worried about affording textbooks now travels internationally as a recognized expert in her field. The Google position I'd been offered straight out of college became even more valuable after I deferred it to pursue my doctorate. They increased their offer and created a custom role that allows me to split time between their AI research division and my doctoral studies. My current compensation package, including stock options that have appreciated dramatically, exceeds what my parents earned in their entire working careers combined. But the financial success, while validating, pales in comparison to the intellectual fulfillment I've discovered. Working alongside Nobel laureates and tech visionaries has shown me what's possible when you're surrounded by people who see potential rather than limitations. Dr. Sarah Chen, my doctoral advisor, recently told me that my research on algorithmic fairness is groundbreaking work that will influence the field for decades. Coming from someone of her caliber, those words carry weight that no family approval could ever match. The personal growth has been equally dramatic. Living in California forced me to rebuild my identity from scratch, free from the expectations and limitations that had constrained me for 28 years. I learned to salsa dance, took up rock climbing, and discovered a passion for photography that serves as a creative counterbalance to my technical work. I've traveled to 14 countries for conferences and research collaborations, experiences that would have been unimaginable in my previous life. Most importantly, I've built relationships with people who celebrate achievement rather than diminishing it. My research partner, David Kim, became my closest friend and eventually my romantic partner. When I told him about my family's reaction to my Stanford acceptance, he was genuinely shocked. "They tried to talk you out of one of the most prestigious opportunities in computer science," he asked incredulously. "That's not family support, that's sabotage." David's perspective helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't normal protective concern, but toxic limitation disguised as love. His own family, Korean immigrants who had sacrificed enormously for their children's education, celebrated every one of my achievements as enthusiastically as they celebrated his. Experiencing genuine family support through his relatives showed me what I'd been missing my entire life. The contrast became even starker when I received the Morrison Prize for Outstanding Doctoral Research last spring. The award, given to only one computer science student nationwide each year, came with a $50,000 grant and recognition from the National Academy of Sciences. David's family flew in from Seattle to attend the ceremony, treating my achievement as a family celebration worthy of their time and expense. My own family's response came through a text message from Bethany, "Saw the news online. Mom and Dad don't know what to say. They're proud but also sad you're so far away." Even faced with national recognition of my work, they couldn't offer unconditional celebration without adding guilt about my geographical distance from their limitations. The irony wasn't lost on me that the people who'd tried hardest to keep me small were now the ones most affected by my success. Through Bethany, I learned that my mother had started telling people at the truck stop about her daughter, the doctor who works for Google. She'd conveniently rewritten history to position herself as supportive of my education, never mentioning her public dismissal of my graduation or her attempts to prevent me from accepting Stanford's offer. Dad had apparently looked up my research online and discovered articles about my work in technology magazines. According to Bethany, he'd printed out several pieces and brought them to Murphy's auto shop to show his coworkers. "That's my daughter," he'd tell anyone who would listen, as if he'd been my biggest supporter all along rather than the man who'd threatened to disown me for pursuing excellence. Their newfound pride felt hollow because it was conditional on external validation rather than genuine belief in my worth. They could celebrate me now because prestigious institutions and major corporations had vouched for my value, but they'd never been willing to support me when that support would have meant believing in potential rather than proven success. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Cutting ties with family, even toxic family, created grief that took months to process. I spent long nights questioning whether I'd been too harsh, whether I should have tried harder to maintain relationships despite their limitations. Therapy helped me understand that choosing your own growth over other people's comfort isn't selfish, it's necessary for becoming who you're meant to be. The healing accelerated when I started mentoring undergraduate students who reminded me of my younger self. Maria Santos, a first-generation college student from a farming family in Central California, worked 3 jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA in computer science. When her parents expressed doubts about her ambitions, I shared my own story and helped her understand that family love sometimes requires setting boundaries around your dreams. Your family's limitations don't have to become your limitations, I told her during one of our mentoring sessions. You can love them while refusing to live down to their expectations. Watching Maria grow in confidence and pursue opportunities her family initially discouraged reminded me why breaking cycles of limitation is so important. Last month, I received an offer that perfectly encapsulates how dramatically my life has changed. Facebook, now Meta, wants me to lead their new AI ethics division after I complete my doctorate. The position comes with a 7-figure compensation package, a team of 50 researchers, and the opportunity to shape how artificial intelligence development considers social impact. It's the kind of role that would have been unimaginable when I was falling asleep over algorithms at Mel's all-night diner. As I consider this offer and others that have emerged, I'm struck by how different my decision-making process is now. Instead of worrying about family approval or staying close to home, I'm evaluating opportunities based on intellectual challenge, potential impact, and alignment with my values. I've learned to trust my own judgment and to surround myself with people who amplify rather than diminish my ambitions. The girl who once needed her parents' validation to feel worthy has grown into a woman who defines her own worth through achievement, contribution, and the positive impact of her work. I still love my family, but I no longer need their approval to feel confident in my choices. That shift in mindset has been more liberating than any external success. To everyone who's followed this journey, thank you for listening. Your support and shared experiences in the comments have reminded me that choosing growth over comfort, excellence over mediocrity, and potential over safety is never easy but always worthwhile. If you're facing pressure to limit your dreams to make others comfortable, remember that you don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. The people who truly love you will celebrate your success, not undermine it. And sometimes, the greatest act of love, for yourself and for future generations, is refusing to accept limitations that others try to impose on your life. What boundaries have you had to set to protect your dreams? Share your story below, because your courage to pursue excellence despite opposition might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.